We continue to get more reaction on government's response to the recommendations of the state capture report, the country's moment of renewal in its fight against corruption. When I joined via Zoom by Ivor Chipkin, is the Director of Government and Public Policy. A very good afternoon to you, Ivor. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
Thanks, Flo.
All right. So, of course, we understand that, a think tank that was established has done some work and research on the inquiry into state capture report. What are your views on the recommendations thus far and steps that government says it will take, that government says will be taken?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the general spirit of some of the announcements are to be welcomed. The very fact that the president has taken the recommendation seriously, I mean, that needs to be welcomed as something that's profoundly encouraging. The spirit of the announcements around SOEs, I think, is to be welcomed. The idea that ministers are being requested to, ordered to not become involved in operational matters, that board members are not allowed to be involved in procurement. What this is a spirit of separating or distinguishing firmly between operational matters, administrative matters, and the matters which are fundamentally political. And I think that the spirit of that announcement must be welcomed. Having said that, I think it's not nearly far enough. I think this is, if this is the beginning of a general movement towards something much more substantial, then it's very, very exciting. If this is the extent of government's response, then I think it's quite worrying. What we've been arguing for years now and writing about for years is that one of the key problems in South Africa, and I think we've been proven right in the state capture episode and in the general dysfunction of many government administrations, is the need in South Africa to move towards a firm separation or distinction between political office and administrative office. It is precisely this boundary that has been blurred since the 1990s, it should be said. So this is not something new. This is not something that started with Jacob Zuma. It's that blurring of the boundary between the administrative and the political that has got us into the trouble which we are in now. And I think if these announcements are the beginning to distinguish more firmly between these two areas, I think it's exciting.
Yeah, we've heard economists and unions coming out and saying that the country cannot afford to not spend money on the implementation of the state capture report recommendations in order to tackle corruption. To what end? I mean, if we're going to fight it, is there money coming back to the fiscus? I mean, we're talking about the fact that South Africa's fiscus is already stretched, but we're chasing after what? To what end? Is any of that money even going to come back, or is this going to be another exercise of spending more money, which already actually saw with the state capture commission? And already we know just how much the poor in our country would rather much use that money that is being used to chase. And at the end of the day, are we sure that any of the culprits will in fact end up behind bars? So it may be a chase and spending all this money and as going back to what I asked initially, to what end?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful to distinguish between several things. Clearly, there are a whole lot of bad people that have done a whole lot of bad things, and they need to be arrested and prosecuted. That's clearly one element, but that surely cannot be the end of it. More fundamentally is to begin to put in place the processes to prevent this from ever happening again. And the place to start is in these administrative, legal, political distinctions, which I was talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
So yes, there are very high costs in researching and finding and prosecuting for the wrongdoers. The administrative changes I'm talking about are things which perhaps can be done without spending so much money. They require political will. They require changes in law in some instances. They require better definition of the conditions of appointment. But I think many of these things can be done through existing institutions. And I think the costs thereof are not enormous in terms of financial costs. I think the costs politically are potentially high for the ruling party. And I think we need to expect that this is an area of going forward of potentially of profound battle or contestation. But I think if these announcements are the beginning of something more substantial, then I think this is a fight which we have to have.
And I think it's interesting, Ivor, that you talk about political will and you talk about the costs politically for, the ruling party. And at the end of the day, the same party that's set to punish this wrongdoing as exposed by the state capture report are in government. And, one may argue that the party that perpetuated these things, and in some instances even shielded those within their ranks who were involved, how are we to have faith in the fact that they would actually act against it? So could this also just be talk at the end of the day, which is basically what I was talking about, which is what I was referring to, and what I fear, that it will be more wasting of money for really inaction?
I'm not worried about the wasting of money, to be honest. I mean, I think this is small scale style money, whose benefit, if we get it right, would be enormous. I think the issue of the ability or the willingness of the ANC to take forward these reforms is a profound question, and there are many in the ANC who benefit from, enjoy the largesse, the power that arises from this blurred distinction between political and administrative office. You can deploy your colleagues, your friends, people in your political alliance into key positions in the state. Having said all that, and as a result, because of that, there will probably be huge resistance from within the ANC to the kinds of changes that are needed. On the other hand, for the very first time, the failure to make these changes now poses an existential threat to the ANC itself. But what's happening is its poor performance in government is starting to now catch up with it electorally. In other words, people are not voting for the ANC. I mean, it's largely lost the urban vote. It's become essentially a rural party. Its electoral fortunes are certainly on the downside. And there does seem to be, for the very first time ever, a relationship between the ANC's performances in elections and its ability to perform in government, which means if the ANC don't correct this, if they don't deal with this substantially in the here and now, they are facing potential extinction or at least huge defeats electorally. So we'll see how it goes. On the one hand, there are those deeply committed to the current system because there are benefits. On the other hand, as a party, the current system endangers the organization, I think, quite dramatically.
All right, Ivor, thanks very much for your input and for joining us here on the show. Ivor Chipkin, who's the Director of Government and Public Policy. Many thanks to you.